Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Fitness Education Series produced by the Australian Fitness Academy. It's like progressive overload for your brain. I'm your host, Tom Rock, and today's episode, I want to talk about exercise tempo. And this shout out to Julie for sending through this question and bringing up this topic, which is really, really good. So Julie sort of asked along the lines of completing the exercise when she's doing it. Should she have like an explosive push to start the exercise, or should she be doing more of a constant push throughout the exercise? And then she sort of followed up as well in terms of, should there be a gap in between each rep, or do I immediately start the next rep as I finish the next one? So am I going out of a rep and then straight into the next one without a pause? And I think they're great questions, and it's a really good topic to cover, exercise tempo, for anybody out there who wants to apply this to if they're resistance training. It's an important concept to grasp, especially initially, and then work into your training. And then if you're a PT or a coach out there, being able to explain exercise tempo and get a client to complete an exercise in the manner that you want it completed is a really important skill and ability to communicate as well. I would say probably the more experience you get at resistance training, potentially the less you need to worry about exercise tempo. You'll sort of do it almost automatically. But there are definitely certain circumstances where exercise tempo can be important in terms of training for maximum power or explosiveness, for example. If you're trying to train for that, exercise tempo is important. It's definitely still important with things like hypertrophy training or any resistance training to make sure you're performing exercise safely and to get the most benefit out of it. But for general sets of, say, 6 to 12, if I'm doing a set of any exercise, you'll find that as long as you have an understanding of how to do the movement safely and in a controlled manner, and you've been training for a while to get maximum stimulus, you want to be moving through the exercise probably as quick as possible. And we won't talk too much about motor unit recruitment and things like that today. But to maximize stimulus, we generally need to be moving the weight or contracting or the muscle shortening sort of as fast as possible. But that doesn't mean it's going to be a quick movement, because we've got load on the whether it's the bar or the weight. Because we're acting against the load, the movement velocity is not necessarily fast, even though we're trying to move the weight fast. But I think, Julie brings around some great questions, and it's a really important thing for people who haven't done a lot of resistance training before if someone's new to the gym or it's new exercise, you potentially handle these situations differently, from a beginner learning the exercise to someone who's more advanced or intermediate, and then trying to get the most benefit out of the exercise. Being able to communicate how you want them to complete it is very, very important, and you don't want to sort of confuse terminology around explosive and things like that. How to perform reps is a really, really important skill to develop in the gym as a resistance training. So what we might do, I think we might jump in the gym. I'm going to do some reps. I think we'll do the leg press and maybe some bicep curls, just to show some examples of how you might talk someone through how to complete their reps, and how I would generally say you should consider doing your reps to maximize performance and adaptation, as well as completing reps safely to reduce the risk of injury. But in saying that, let's jump into the gym, and we'll see how we go. All right, here we are on the leg press. So when we're doing reps and we're talking about tempo, we talk about a concentric phase, eccentric phase. So concentric is the push out, or the working phase. We have a little isometric pause, which we'll have a talk about 4 numbers later on, or 3 or 4 numbers. And then we have the eccentric phase, which is the lowering phase. And then we might have a phase with a little pause, reset, and go again. So when we're talking about how explosive do we start, I think it's important, and it depends on each exercise, is going to be slightly different in terms of how we coach it, but we generally are going to be starting with some tension on the muscle, and then we push. So you don't want to go from having no tension, especially if you're on a machine that goes, say, all the way back. You don't want to go from no tension to just sort of big driving off. Get some tension, get some tension in the muscles, and then you want to push. And from there, on the eccentric, we definitely want to control the weight. It doesn't have to be overly slow, but control it. And then as we push to the concentric, we generally want to be driving as fast as we can under control. Especially if you're a beginner or newer to the gym, we want to probably control the way up. It doesn't need to be super explosive because our weight's probably not enough to slow us down. But once we put more weight on the butt, you can push as fast as you can, and that weight is not going to move. If it's a bit light, definitely don't need to overextend, but you want to have some tension, little pause, and push. So control the way down, pause, and drive. So it should be a relatively explosive drive, but that weight should be enough that it slows you down. And then when you get to the last few reps of your set, it should be slowing down because of that fatigue. So that last sort of rep, maybe 1 or 2 in reserve, should be a little bit slower than your first few reps. Let's check out bicep curls. Now, it's the same thing when we do a bicep curl. So I'm starting here. The first movement is going to be the concentric movement where I drive up, and then the eccentric movement is when I lower down. So in this exercise, whether it's on a barbell or a machine or any other sort of bicep curls, you generally want to be driving up as fast as you can. Again, within reason. If it's sort of throwing you off balance and you're losing form, that's too quick. But we want to get to the point where we're sort of driving up relatively quick and control the way down. So with the eccentric, even if we don't specify it specifically that we should be taking 1, 2, 3 seconds on the way down, for example, we just don't want to be going from here all the way to the bottom and letting it drop. That's probably going to increase our risk of injury. So whether it's a machine or dumbbells or however we're doing our cables, for example, coming down in a controlled manner, at least probably 1 or 2 seconds, is a safer way to train, and then we drive up. In terms of the reset, little pause, drive back up. Generally keeping tension on that muscle is good. You can sort of, you want to fully extend, little pause, come back up, rather than sort of bouncing and getting momentum that way. We use momentum, and we'll use what's called the stretch shortening cycle to lift the weight, which potentially, if we're trying to train hypertrophy and develop muscle mass, it's going to take away from us having to, or stimulating muscle growth via activating the motor units, because we're getting sort of free movement from the stretch shortening cycle and the elasticity of the muscles. So we generally, a little pause at the bottom helps us avoid that, and then we drive up. And generally you want to get your sets to where that last couple of reps is relatively hard. But in terms of exercise tempo, that's how we should think about it, is drive the way up, control the way down, with a little pause before we start the next rep. Back to the studio.
All right, there we have it. Hopefully some examples of exercise tempo, but how I think about completing reps when I do exercises. So as I mentioned out there, so exercise tempo can generally be described using 3 or 4 numbers. And if you see it prescribed in a program, it's generally the eccentric, the isometric in the middle, and then the concentric. And that 4th number will be the pause, if there is one, before the next rep. So that'll let you know basically what your timing should be for each phase of the movement. So the numbers are always eccentric, isometric, concentric, and then potentially the reset. Even if the exercise starts with a concentric movement, the eccentric number is still first. We don't change the order of the tempo prescription. So the examples you saw there was the leg press, which the first movement was the eccentric. I was lowering the weight. It wasn't sort of the working phase of the exercise. It was lowering it. So that's eccentric first. But with the bicep curl, when I start here, that starts with the concentric phase. But the order of the numbers that I will prescribe don't change. And it's understanding what those numbers are. But I think sometimes it is good to be specific, and putting it in programs can help people newer to the gym or even intermediate events consider what they are doing and keep it in the front of mind as they go through their exercise to maximize outcomes and make sure they are being consistent with their reps, because it will change how the exercise feels. So if I do sort of slower eccentrics, that is going to make the exercise a lot harder, and I'll get less reps than I would have if I had have done say just a 1 second eccentric. That time or the time it takes me to lengthen that muscle if I'm doing a bicep curl on the way down, if I do that really, really slow, it's going to create more muscle damage, more fatigue, and I'll get less reps overall. So if that's a factor in my week to week, I might go, oh, I only got 6 reps. Last week I did 12, but it could be due to me lowering the weight a little bit, or a fair bit slower. Over time, as you develop the skill of resistance training, it'll become just second nature of how you complete your reps. But I think it's important to consider that you want to generally drive through that concentric phase sort of as you could say explosively, but generally as fast as possible under control, I think is good. And you want to make sure you generally get some tension on that muscle before you push. So don't go from, if I'm on the leg press, straight from nothing to trying to push as hard as I can. Feel your way into that rep and accept the load of the weight on your muscle. So you've got tension, you've braced your core, whatever exercise it is, we're feeling some tension, and then we drive through the rest of that rep. So that can be really important. But hopefully that gives you a bit of an idea. Again, it's something you've really got to get out there, practice, and think about. And that's why putting tempo in programs can be very beneficial, but also working on it as a skill, especially when you're getting into resistance training or getting back into resistance training. How much weight is on the bar or the exercise is also going to affect it. So if you're using a lighter weight, then potentially you can lift. That drive and that explosiveness is going to sort of be over exaggerated. So it'll take you a lot longer to get to that point of where you can put a lot of force through the bar and not see that sort of explosiveness, loss of control. But if you're using enough weight that sits you in relatively probably the 6 to 12 rep range, after that first 3 or 4 reps, you can sort of push and drive, and you'll find it's sort of a relatively good feeling, and you can leave yourself with 1 to 2 reps in reserve. But that last few reps, you should see that weight slowing down. No matter how, if you're pushing as hard as you can, that speed of the bar is slowing down. So tempo is not going to be perfect the whole way through the set in terms of the concentric phase, but definitely controlling the eccentric, doing a little pause between each rep just to sort of reset, potentially brace, can be beneficial. And then you could program a pause in the middle, but generally it's get to the top and sort of straight back into the eccentric is more normal than doing sort of a isometric pause at the bottom. But it can be good for control for things, say like a bench press. When I do my eccentric, I don't want to sort of come down and just bounce the bar off, come down, little pause, drive up. Doesn't have to be long, might be half a second, 1 second. You can obviously adjust that to change the focus of the exercise as well. So exercise tempo, if you do prescribe it, you can adjust it to, say, add variation and different stresses to a program to change the focus of an exercise depending on the client's goals or what that client specifically needs to get better or adapt or improve strength or whatever it is. So something you can be played around with. But in general, it's how we control the bar. And I think it is an important thing to develop with clients as they start to learn how to resistance train, is how to perform reps in an efficient and safe and controlled manner, but also getting the best outcome of that exercise in terms of adaptation and hypertrophy, which if you're not sort of driving through that concentric phase as fast as possible, you're probably not getting the most benefit out of the resistance training as you could. But yeah, hopefully that helps, guys. You got a bit out of that. If you do have any questions on this one, email tom@afa.com.au, or if you've got any other questions or topics you'd like me to cover, send me an email as well. Happy to cover off anything you guys would like to hear me chat about. Other than that, guys, have a great weekend, and I'll talk to you all soon.